Geno Smith was traded to the Raiders, and it sets up a massive free agency for the NFL. We're breaking it all down on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the legacy, Louis DiBiase. On today's episode, we are getting you ready for free agency. But to do that, we got to go back over everything that has happened this weekend, from Davante Adams going to the Rams, to Myles Garrett's monster deal with the Browns, to the Geno Smith trade that rocked the NFL world. Before we get into all of it, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. Louis, the big news that started the weekend, Geno Smith goes to the Raiders. For the Raiders, what's your instant reaction here?
I don't think it makes any sense for their timeline. I think hiring Pete Carroll made this team go for the short term, I think, too much. And the Geno Smith move just feels like a lateral one. I don't think this makes any progress towards their long-term build. So for Seattle, it makes sense. I don't think it makes sense for Vegas at all.
It's quite an interesting move for the Raiders to make, to kind of commit to Geno Smith here. But my guy Q from Locked On Raiders talked about the big move.
Hey, what's happening? It's Q Myers, your boy Q, here for the Locked On Raiders podcast. It's official like a referee's whistle. Actually, it's not official till next week, but we do know that the Raiders have agreed to a trade with the Seattle Seahawks for quarterback Geno Smith. They're sending a 2025 third-round pick to Seattle. Geno's the guy that has 1 year left on his current deal. We know that free agency is going to open up next week. There was conversations about the Raiders possibly being interested in Aaron Rodgers, possibly interested in Sam Darnold. Now they don't have to worry about going and exploring that opportunity. They can now still turn their attention to free agency next week and potentially a quarterback coming up in the NFL draft. Now that they have a guy that's very familiar with Pete Carroll, has had a lot of success with Pete Carroll for their time together in Seattle, they have another quarterback to add to the quarterback room along with Aiden O'Connell. So you've got Aiden O'Connell, Carter Bradley, and now Geno Smith, maybe other if they find one in the NFL draft. For all things silver and black, make sure you're tuning in to the Locked On Raiders podcast. I'm Q Myers.
Honestly, when I heard this, I felt the same as you. This doesn't really move the needle for me for the Raiders as a franchise. They're immediately going to be more competitive. But again, the reason that the Seahawks probably moved off Geno is he's going to be 35 years old. Like, how much longer can you really expect him to be your franchise quarterback? So maybe the Raiders still take a quarterback in the draft. But honestly, after my initial reaction, my first thought for them is, oh, all the people mocking Ashton Genty to them in the first round, you're probably going to end up right, because they're going to make a win-now move like drafting a running back.
Yeah, I mean, the Raiders are doing a really good job building a future 6-7 win football team, but I just don't understand. Look, if they draft still Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders and Geno's a 1 year bridge plan to a rookie developing, then I totally get it. So I don't want to totally judge this move yet. But based on they also were targeting Matt Stafford and were willing to pay him money, and Pete Carroll's their head coach, who I don't think is in it for the long term, this does seem like a move where they're trying to compete now and prioritizing the short term. So I don't know if this is going to lead to a rookie quarterback within the next 2 years coming into Vegas. They might give Geno Smith a new contract, and I think it's almost like they traded for Seattle's purgatory, and I don't get it for the Raiders at all.
Yeah, I think based on some of the additional reporting that we've gotten since then, the expectation is that the Raiders are going to give him a 3-year extension, $40 to $45 million a year. And it sounds like maybe he just wanted out of Seattle more than anything. And we kind of look to the Seattle side of things. And I don't mind it for Seattle. I think you were never going anywhere with Geno Smith. He's at the end of his career as well. I think kind of going back to formula, you could say, for the Seahawks might have been the right move here.
No, I agree. And I think Seattle did all they could with the Geno Smith era. I think they hit a ceiling I didn't know was there. I mean, consistently was winning, 8 to 10 games, including last season. But yeah, especially with the DK Metcalf trade request, moving on from Tyler Lockett. It's a new era in Seattle. It's a younger core. And again, it's kind of like a lot of these teams going for these mid-tier quarterbacks. Is there ever a scenario these quarterbacks are going to win you a Super Bowl? And that might not be the priority for every NFL team, but for Seattle, it just felt like they were kind of going nowhere and becoming almost like a lower version of the Pittsburgh Steelers of the NFC. And I'm actually think the Seattle made the right call kind of getting out of that. It's tough sometimes. You get comfortable in that complacency, but I think they made the right call.
Well, here's the only problem that I would say with what we're laying out here is it looks like Seattle may just be signing back up for more quarterback.
I was going to say, yes.
The number one target that we're hearing, and I honestly, in my opinion, Louis, it's one of those things that's being telegraphed by the media. Everybody knows that Seattle probably found their next quarterback, and I'll let my guy Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks break that news too.
We can discuss why this move was made, all the little wrinkles that appear to be behind this move happening. Now a lot of discussion that Geno Smith may have wanted to just be out of Seattle in general. There's a lot of things to unpack on that front. But look, free agency starts tomorrow, really, with the legal tampering period opening. It's time to focus on who's going to be replacing him, and that's certainly what the Seahawks are quickly doing. And the one name that immediately cropped up once the news broke that Smith was getting traded, no surprise here, Sam Darnold, widely considered the number one free agent quarterback in this year's class after a breakout year in Minnesota. This has one of those buyers beware type things to it because Sam Darnold, his first 6 years, was a below average starting quarterback and lost his job with not one but two different teams. And at the same time, he's only 27 years old, and he threw 35 touchdown passes last year for a 14-win Vikings team. And oh, by the way, Clint Kubiak runs a pretty similar offense to the one that Kevin O'Connell runs in Minnesota.
Look, I guess I understand the philosophy here of, hey, you need a quarterback, and even if you have a Geno Smith, Sam Darnold level quarterback, like, you got to look at the Eagles. I know that Jalen Hurts is better than those guys, but Jalen Hurts also isn't Patrick Mahomes. You know what I mean? So it's like, if we can build a good enough roster around this player, we might still be able to compete. But it is kind of hilarious that they get rid of Geno Smith, and it's like, well, we want Sam Darnold, which is just like, that same tier of quarterback. So I get aging down in the position, and that might be more valuable to you. But to me, it still is a little fishy. Are you really going to win a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold?
Yeah, it feels like a very lateral move, and I might have put the carriage before the horse with giving Seattle credit if this is their next move after Geno Smith. So, and I also just don't think it makes a lot of sense for Sam Darnold. I think one main issue Darnold dealt with in the past in New York, even at the end of the season in Minnesota, is handling pressure. And Seattle has one of the worst offensive lines in football. So looking at it from Sam Darnold's perspective, I don't know if it makes sense, especially if DK Metcalf, if this is not a leverage play for a contract and he does want out. Yeah. I don't know why, if I'm Sam Darnold, I'm going to Seattle. I don't think that makes sense for either side.
Well, that's fair. And if Seattle were to pivot, we're hearing that Aaron Rodgers might be an option. And we're also hearing that the Steelers are an option for Sam Darnold. So let's dive more into where these quarterbacks might end up. It's a free agency preview of the Locked On NFL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, Louis, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, a little free agency preview, but we got to start with that big quarterback news with Geno Smith. It's going to kind of set up everything that happens throughout the rest of the weekend. But we talked about Sam Darnold, and I think Sam Darnold, in my opinion, is the next big domino to fall. Is once Sam Darnold picks his team, the rest of the options are less appealing. I think Sam Darnold is the only long-term starting solution available on the market right now. Now, whether we believe in Sam Darnold as a good starting long-term option is a different conversation. But the reality is right now, if you want a long-term answer at the quarterback position, and when we say long-term, I think like 3 to 4 years at max in the NFL. That's long-term in the NFL. Sam Darnold's really your only guy. So who gets him? Seattle, probably the front runner right now if we had to handicap it. But the Pittsburgh Steelers also, according to a report from Diana Rossini, very, very interested in Sam Darnold. And my guy Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers talked about that possibility.
They are trying to solidify the quarterback situation before anything else. And that is what the key is. They want to figure out who their quarterback is so that they can then figure out what receivers they need to go get so they can figure out everything else and how to prioritize the rest of the spending around that. Now, as we've talked about with Nick Farabaugh, with Alan Saunders, with Mike DeFable, we've talked about this for over a month now about how this is going to be an interesting negotiation period. And it's now coming to a head because next week on Monday, that's when things start opening up. The tampering period begins, and then we are beginning the real stages of free agency where teams can start to talk to other players and come to agreements and things like that. And that's what I think Justin Fields' agents are trying to see if they can get the Steelers to get them to a number that they like before that period. And then if the Steelers want to sign Justin Fields, and every indication we have here at Locked On Steelers is that the Steelers are prioritizing signing Justin Fields, but they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. If Justin Fields in his camp does, kind of holds things out and then all of a sudden gets snatched up by another team that wants to offer him big money, the Steelers then would probably go with Russell Wilson or, create some other alternative plan here.
And the alternate plan appears to be Sam Darnold because it sounds like Justin Fields may be headed to the New York Jets. So, Louis, the question is, if you're Sam Darnold and you have the choice between the Steelers and the Seahawks, which team are you going with in free agency?
I'm going with Pittsburgh again, and Sam Darnold has seen the polar opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to QB support systems.
Right.
With the New York Jets, there was no protection with the offensive line. The weapons weren't there. It was Adam Gase, the coach. It was a disaster, and it almost ruined his career. And then in Minnesota, that's one of the most perfectly quarterback-friendly systems with their head coach and their weapons, and you saw career rejuvenation. So if I'm Sam Darnold, I should be very picky about not just going to the first team that offers me the long-term starting quarterback gig. And although there's not a perfect solution that's very similar to Minnesota here, between the two, I'd much rather go to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I actually agree with you 100% because at the end of the day, to me, it's a trust thing. And I just trust Mike Tomlin and the Steelers' infrastructure more than I trust the Seahawks infrastructure. Like, that's just, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to for me. If the money is similar, the years are similar, I would rock with the Steelers and think there's a better chance that defense is going to keep me in positions to win. You have a George Pickens. If they get some more assets on the offensive line, I think they end up trading for Cooper Kupp. Like, they're going to make a deal for a secondary wide receiver at some point. So I'm with you there. I think that would be the best option. Now, if Sam Darnold were to pick the Steelers, then that leaves Aaron Rodgers to pick the Seahawks or potentially the Jets is a team. Not the Jets, the Giants, getting my New York's team mixed up. If you're Aaron Rodgers and then you have the Seahawks or the Giants, for me, I'm taking the Seahawks because I think they're a more ready-made team. But if they get rid of DK Metcalf and you're Aaron Rodgers, now JSN, Malik Neighbors, what's going to happen with that? Andrew Thomas is a better left tackle than anybody they have. Charles Cross isn't bad, but I think that's a tougher decision for Aaron Rodgers. Do I move to a different coast with maybe a better team or go and stay in New York with still a roster that gives you some upside chance?
And it really depends on DK Metcalf. If he's back, I would go Seattle. But the Giants do have some pieces. They have on defense, like Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. They have Dexter Lawrence. Like, that's a good defensive line. Yes. If you're Aaron Rodgers and you're thinking for the short term, do I have the best chance to win right now in New York or Seattle? I might say New York, but I just don't think like it moves the needle for me for Aaron Rodgers at any one of these teams. I don't think any team should say you see Aaron Rodgers and be like, we're that guy away from winning a championship. I don't know. That just makes no sense.
I agree, which why a third intriguing option that's popped up now, and it may make you feel like you live in the Matrix. And folks, we very well may live in a simulation if this happens. But we're hearing some rumblings about Aaron Rodgers and the Minnesota Vikings. Rodgers could be a good little bridge until J.J. McCarthy is healthy. McCarthy's still only 22 years old. You don't need to rush. It could be closer to a Jordan Love situation than, instantly start right away in year 2 off the ACL. If you add Minnesota into the equation and you're Rodgers, do you prefer that or do you prefer one of the other two opportunities that we just talked about?
It's definitely Minnesota, but how insane is it that this guy might follow the same career path of Brett Favre to the T, where he wins a Super Bowl early, a guy gets drafted in the first round, waiting in the wings behind him. He goes to the Jets for a few years, is a disaster. Then Minnesota, it feels like Groundhog Day. It's crazy. For me, though, for Minnesota, I would just play J.J. McCarthy next year. I don't think, again, they're a Super Bowl team with Aaron Rodgers if they weren't last year with Sam Darnold. And again, that's such a quarterback-friendly offense that you can bring along a quarterback as a first-year starter where there might be some growing pains, but he can learn on the field in a system that's just so, again, QB-friendly that I think that's one of the best situations in the league where you don't have to sit the quarterback. So I would just move forward with McCarthy if I'm Minnesota. Again, a lot of these teams just going for this middling. I know the NFL doesn't think in this extreme world that I do at quarterback, but it just feels like it doesn't make sense for the long term for any of these teams to go with what's out there right now.
Well, you're right. A lot of teams just can't focus too much on the long term because they might not be a part of the long term. Right. So you do got to win games. But I'm with you there, and I think that's why ultimately, despite what we've heard, Minnesota will go more with a Daniel Jones or a Mac Jones or something in that vein. I think makes more sense. But you start to look at the landscape here. If Darnold goes to the Seahawks or Darnold goes to the Steelers and Rodgers goes to the Seahawks and Derek Carr went back to the Saints officially this weekend. Justin Fields is supposed to go to the Jets. And Russell Wilson, I think, at that point would go to the Giants. The Giants were interested in Russell Wilson last year. They want a veteran no matter if they draft a young guy or not. So that makes sense. At some point, the Colts are interested in competition. Are they going to be able to get their hands on Daniel Jones? I think Minnesota's a better opportunity there. Yep. If you're Daniel Jones, do you pick Minnesota and the QB halfway house that appears to be with a great system and weapons around? Or do you go to the Colts where you might be their long-term answer if you can beat out Anthony Richardson?
I would go to the Colts. And if I'm a team looking for a quarterback, again, unless you think this player can help you win a championship right now, I'd go for someone that at least has some long-term potential to be the franchise quarterback.
Like a Fields or a Daniel Jones.
That's why I've, on the show, repeatedly said Fields actually interests me more than anybody. Even though it still doesn't excite me, it makes more sense than Rodgers is not going to turn the clock back and be an MVP. Russell Wilson's not either. A team should, if a Daniel Jones goes to the Colts, or let's say a Sam Darnold even went to Indianapolis, is Anthony Richardson available for any price? I know it was such a disastrous first few years in Indy, but at least there's a shot that he becomes something. There's some ceiling there. So I think Daniel Jones makes sense in Indy. I would be interested, though, in the availability of Anthony Richardson at some point this year.
And I think if you're a team like the Seattle Seahawks or if you're a team like the New York Jets and you don't get Justin Fields, that would make a ton of sense to make an investment there. But one thing I do want to point out here is, where does this leave the Titans and the Browns, who both need quarterbacks? If all of the truly viable starting quarterbacks are off the board here, Rodgers, Darnold, Wilson, Fields, even Daniel Jones, if all these guys are off the board with more logical fits, the Browns and the Titans both need quarterbacks desperately. And that brings us to a conversation about Myles Garrett, his deal, and how that impacts the NFL draft. Plus, Devontae Adams signed with the Rams. So much news in the NFL right now. One of the best times of the year. Great time to get subscribed. Stay subscribed to Locked On NFL. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers to FanDuel Sportsbook can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's going to cut down the nets. For me personally, I love picking the favorites. I feel like in college basketball lately, it's been a lot of chalk, and FanDuel makes it so easy to back them with spreads, totals, game props. I can stay in the action with live bets and tournament games happening all the time, all day, and FanDuel is super easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Again, it's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Louie, we're going to cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. This time of year, folks, I'm just going to admit it to you. By the time, like Josh Allen just got a 6-year, $330 million deal with $250 million guaranteed. I mean, I can't even put my phone down, Louie.
No.
Or we get more NFL news. So, big time deal for Josh Allen. We'll hit that first. Smart by the Bills. One of the best players that I've seen in recent NFL history. Lock him up, throw away the key. Not much else to say about that.
No, and again, it only helps your current cap backload these contracts, the huge signing bonuses. It's going to give you more money up front. One of the more obvious moves you can make in the NFL. But yeah, do not put your phone down these next few days because the news is dropping. Put the notifications on for Adam Schefter, for all the insiders. Like, hey, this is the time of year.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. But Josh Allen wasn't the only player to get a monster historic deal in the NFL on Sunday. Myles Garrett, who had requested a trade, looked like he was going to fight tooth and nail to get out of Cleveland. Well, money tends to make people change their mind. We'll throw it to my guy Spencer from Locked On Browns to break that down.
As Myles Garrett has now agreed, he's pivoted from his stance and agreed to a record-setting contract extension with the Cleveland Browns. It makes him not only the highest paid defensive player in the NFL, it makes him the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, which is also pretty important to note because we know there's some other big deals that are going to be sort of negotiated here. Jamar Chase is looking for a contract extension. Does he try to one-up Myles Garrett and get a big deal? So this has ripple effects throughout the NFL as well. Micah Parsons is part of this equation because he's looking for a new contract extension with the Cowboys. But the details that we know are this. It's 4 years tacked onto the 2 that he already has left on his contract. $40 million per year on average, $123.5 million guaranteed, with a total of $204.8 million all when it's all said and done. It keeps him in Cleveland theoretically through 2030, but it's also important to know that it has a no trade clause.
So Myles Garrett gets everything that he wanted. And it's funny that Spencer is saying this deal has ripple effects across the NFL and mentioned good names like Jamar Chase, Micah Parsons, who are next in line to get that highest non-paid quarterback money. But it also had an impact on the quarterback market because Josh Allen gets this huge deal to reset things, $55 million per season. I mean, Myles Garrett, they weren't going to trade him. They would have had to eat way too much dead cap. It didn't happen. Smart to get your money. Josh Allen, smart to pay that money there. I don't have a problem with either of these extensions. They're both the right thing to do.
No, and with the way non-quarterbacks are getting historic money, you're going to see these next quarterback contracts just go to the moon. I mean, Allen getting $55 million a year. I imagine when a new deal comes up for Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, like that big five, it's going to be insane money. With Myles Garrett, it is funny, though. I really do believe he wanted to go elsewhere and be a winner. I don't think this was a play to get a new contract, but this also proves that everyone's got a number, right? Everyone can be bought. And $40 million a year, he's like, never mind, this is fine. And I thought that was kind of funny this morning, but good on the Browns. Normally, these kind of situations with the player power of this last decade, normally this ends like 99% of the time in the player getting traded. Cleveland gave him a number he can't refuse, and Myles Garrett's going to stay in Cleveland.
And worth noting that like Spencer mentioned, there's a no trade clause in here. Yeah. So Myles Garrett was like, hey, if we do decide down the road to do a deal, I want to have control over where I go and not you guys. And that was the concession that the Browns made there. So interesting how they found a way to make that work. But moving away here from the contracts, now the Browns have Myles Garrett, and they could still draft Abdul Carter. They absolutely could. But I think the largest non-quarterback contract in the history of the NFL, plus the number 2 overall pick in the draft at the same position, is maybe not the best way to build the roster with the amount of assets you have, even if it's the second most important position in the NFL, in my opinion, outside of quarterback. To me, this points, and with the quarterback discussion that we just had, this points to the Browns taking a quarterback in the draft. Yeah. And you hear a lot of reports of Cleveland is like the most guaranteed, because with how much money they're paying Deshaun Watson and how much dead money he's going to incur, even after this year into next year, he's going to be so much dead money when they cut him. The only option they have at quarterback, really, with how much assets they're burning on it with Watson, is to take one in the draft and have a rookie contract. So whether that's in the second round or the first round, it seems clear that the Browns are going to have to find their quarterback in the draft.
Yeah, I was about to say it's not just the Myles Garrett $40 million a year, but the Deshaun Watson, it's one of the most historically bad mistakes a sports franchise has ever made. So they're going to be dealing with the ramifications of that financially for a while. So the Browns of any team needs rookie, cost-controlled quarterback play. And, Shadur Sanders doesn't move the needle as much for me as Cam Ward does. If it's Cam Ward at number 2, I'd be all over that if I'm Cleveland. But even if it is Sanders, I think that's just a better idea than, again, like all these names that we've mentioned, the Daniel Jones even, or a Mac Jones. I don't think Cleveland's there. And now that Myles Garrett is extended, you can have a little more patience. Like, you can kind of build this thing more long-term. And I think a rookie quarterback in Cleveland now makes a ton of sense.
Me too. And likewise, the Tennessee Titans, they have to take Cam Ward. They have to.
I think they have to.
If all of these quarterbacks go – now, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen. The Titans could go out and get Aaron Rodgers or pay Sam Darnold or something like that. But if Darnold goes to one of the Seahawks or the Steelers, and Rodgers goes to the other one of the Seahawks and the Steelers, and Wilson goes to the Giants, and, Justin Fields goes to the Jets, if you're the Tennessee Titans, Brian Callahan is coaching for his job. Are you going to give Brian Callahan, Zach Wilson, and Will Levis and say, save your job? Like, you just simply can't sell that to the fan base. You can't sell that to the coaching staff that you're giving them a realistic chance to win football games this year. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy any of that. So the further we get along here, the more it looks like the Tennessee Titans need to take Cam Ward with the number 1 overall pick. And I think if the Titans go out and sign Jacoby Brissett or Jameis Winston or something like that, me personally, that would make me feel more confident that they're going out and get a Cam Ward, because they're getting a guy who can be a logical backup behind him. But I don't see any starting up. Maybe the Titans trade for Kirk Cousins. The Browns can't do that because they're paying too much to Watson. They can't pay Kirk Cousins' salary too. The Titans probably could afford it if they can give up, a 5th-round pick or something like that. But, at the end of the day, Kirk Cousins with a 5th-round pick or Cam Ward, I know they want to trade down, but it seems pretty clear. And maybe some of this has to do with the Titans making that decision. They hosted Cam Ward for his draft visit on Thursday, it was, and maybe they made their decision then, hey, we're taking him number 1, and that's what maybe caused these dominoes to start falling down. It's hard to know.
If you're Tennessee, just look at all of these teams that are going to have to convince them, talk themselves into a Sam Darnold or a Justin Fields or, a Mac Jones even, because they're stuck. If you're the Titans, why would you try to put yourself actively in that position? Again, you might not love this quarterback class with Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders, but I just think it's worth taking a shot with how unpredictable the quarterback position is with who works and who doesn't. There is not a black and white formula a lot of the time.
Correct.
So just take a shot when you're up there. If I'm Tennessee, I'm all over Cam Ward. And yeah, like you said, you can still bring in one of these bridge quarterbacks like a Kirk Cousins, and he might not have to start right away. But I don't know. I'm all about taking big swings when you're at the top. Even a team like the Colts, they missed on Anthony Richardson. But if you're not willing to take those kind of players, then you're going to miss out on the Josh Allens of the world down the road, because you won't be willing to take that kind of prospect. So, and I'm a big Cam Ward guy. So I think Tennessee or Cleveland should absolutely have him as their quarterback in 2025.
I think the argument here is, some point you just have to take your chance. You said, it's not an exact science. It's not black and white. It's not, hey, if they're good in college, they'll be good. Hey, if they have this trait, they'll be good. You can't look at anything for certain. So at some point, you just have to take your chances here. Mm-hmm. And I think Cam Ward is good enough to take a chance if you're the Tennessee Titans.
Agreed.
And without another logical option, these owners think we got to sell tickets too. And the Titans were not doing much of that late last season. And if you go in with Zach Wilson and Will Levis competing next year, Abdul Carter and no amount of draft picks are going to sell those tickets.
No, I can't say so. That'd be a fun summer training battle for people that were draft guys of those players. And I kind of liked both in the draft, but no, I don't think that sells tickets or merchandise in Tennessee.
No, it doesn't do much for fan excitement. But with that being said, we got to get out of here, Louis, because there's probably going to be even more news before we can do anything. It's that time of year, folks. Enjoy it. Perfect reason to check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins, because he's going to get you up to date on everything that happened since we recorded. But thanks so much for tuning in. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, with my co-host, The Legacy, Louis DiBiase. Stay safe out there.